Test 1, 2. Thank you for that feedback, Flan. Early stream hiccups, these are bound to happen. Welcome back to Game Center Live. It's a pleasure to see you all. Thank you for the helpful feedback. I'll just repeat what I said once again. First up, you'll be hearing from Karl Hohn about Chex Quest. Brought to you, he's our new production technician. He took my job very happily. He'll be joined by none other than Charles Pratt. Then, right after, it's finally time for the return of the Discourse. That's right, Naomi Clark is back to discuss game industry news and give us some scorching hot takes. Today, joined by Game Center alumni Aaron Freedman. All of that is coming up and more, but first, some news. Playtest Thursday is happening every Thursday this fall from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. every single Thursday. Come down to the NYU Game Center with your work-in-progress games and get feedback from fellow game makers. No game is too early in development for Playtest Thursday, and all types of games are welcome. Non-NYU guests are welcome to attend, and to do so, fill out this link in chat. This Thursday, September 21st at 7 p.m., join us for a career talk with MFA alum Carol Mertz. If you're curious about what life is like after graduating from the Game Center, Carol will be visiting to talk about her career in tabletop game design and development. This career talk is free and open to the public, and the RSVP link is available in chat. Next Thursday, September 28th at 7 p.m., we will be having our first lecture series event of the fall semester. At this talk, you will hear from Game Center MFA alum, co-founder of Baby Castles Gallery, and recent addition to the Game Center faculty, Laura Suits Clark. This talk will cover their current work in progress, Faith Companion, a game of time-traveling dogs and wage workers in a company town struggling to be noticed. This talk is also free and open to the public, and the link is in chat. Save the date for No Quarter 2023. That's right, on Friday, November 17th from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., the NYU Game Center will be hosting the 12th incarnation of No Quarter. No Quarter is an annual playable exhibition where 4 newly commissioned works from leading artists working across games are debuted. The full lineup of No Quarter 2023 artists will be revealed soon, but in the meantime, you can still RSVP to the event using the link in chat. All right, that's about it for today's news. So without further ado, grab your spoons and cereal, sit close to the TV, and let me introduce you to Karl and Charles. Take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Logan, and welcome everybody to Game Center Live back finally. Karl, were you around the first?
I was not.
Did you watch? Were you exposed to this insane project that Logan has taken up?
No, this is my first time out the gate with Game Center Live in any capacity.
All right, so well, welcome. So, what are you going to be talking about today?
Today, I am going to be talking about a game that is near and dear to my heart. Little context, when I was a kid, my parents didn't have a problem with video games as much as they had a problem with video games in the living room. So we never had consoles, but everything was on the PC in another room with the door closed.
Okay.
And one of the games I spent the most time with was Chex Quest. This is a total conversion mod of Doom that was released as a pack-in product in boxes of Chex cereal. So you would get a free a CD-ROM that had 50 free hours of AOL and a 5-level playable, or I think 3 levels in Chex Quest, fully playable, completely reskinned version of Doom.
And this would be on a floppy disk, one of those little
CD-ROM.
It was a CD-ROM.
It was
game.
a CD-ROM.
Ah, interesting. Okay, all right.
It was created by a creative branding agency based out of St. Paul, Minnesota, called Digital Cafe in 1996. 6-month development time, 6-person team. The 3 kind of main players of that team being lead artist Charles Jacoby, music composer Andrew Benson, and lead developer Scott Holman, who was 17 years old and in high school at the time, and they would go pick him up after school, and he would work nights building a total conversion Doom mod. I presented a slide deck about this at Baby Castle's Game of the Month Club in August of 2019.
Okay.
And then I put together a larger, an expanded version of that presentation, which I showed at MagFest 2020, and for which I've lost the files. So, but yeah,
so we're getting the Baby Castles version.
Yes, this is an abridged version of the first draft.
Excellent. I'm very excited.
So this is the original cover art for Chex Quest.
Okay.
This would have come shrink wrapped in a little envelope in a box of Chex cereal.
Yeah.
I believe that they pressed 6 million copies of this, and I think they sold. And I think they had all the whole run had been sold in like a month or something like that.
Wow.
I think they increased the sales of Chex cereal to something in the order of about 400%.
Wow.
But when I was thinking about this, I wanted to start with just when do pack-in prizes in cereal become a thing? And it turns out that they become a thing within a year of the invention of box cereal. Well, not pack-in, but a prize. So the first box cereal on the market is Kellogg's Corn Flakes in 1906. The first cereal prize is the Kellogg's Funny Jungle Land Moving Pictures book from 1907.
Wow.
And this was not packed into the box. You would redeem this at the point of purchase, but it had these kind of like tabs that would flip out so that you could superimpose different faces over different bodies and things like that. By the 1930s, the pack-in prize has become a ubiquitous feature in marketing, and we have things like the Little Orphan Annie Ovaltine decoder ring. Which, has just become kind of a cultural trope. Kind of this idea of, you put a little thing in the box and you get, people to sit there with it while they listen to the radio show. For scale, this one's about the size of a penny.
Yeah.
And this one is, and the decoder ring becomes a trope in and of itself. This is, I believe, a Johnny Quest one that was packaged with PF Flyers sneakers. And here's a Chex one. So this one actually was in a box of Chex cereal in the 60s. And then here's a Chex Rubik's Cube from the 80s. And at this point, sort of, where does this start to intersect with video games? We get the adver game pretty close, pretty much as soon as, certainly at least as soon as home console gaming is a thing, there is a push to create advertising content. This is Chase the Chuck Wagon, another Ralston Purina product, Purina dog kibble. This is a pretty well-known adver game. Then there's also a game called Pepsi Invaders. I'll mute this, but Pepsi Invaders is a clone of Space Invaders made by Coke and distributed at trade fairs. It's one of the most rare Atari 2600 games there is, I believe.
Wow.
And so it's Space Invaders, but instead of alien sprites, you're shooting out the letters of Pepsi. I think they even left that alien sprite alone.
Yeah.
There's also Yo-Noid.
This is the one I played.
Yep.
I definitely played this one.
I forget the name. This was a Japanese Nintendo game, and the way they licensed it for distribution in America was to partner with Domino's.
Right.
And so this is kind of that's kind of an interesting so there's plenty of precedent here, just not for the cereal box part.
Right.
Doom comes out in 1993. It's followed by Doom 2. And one of the key points here is that they release the level editors when they release the game. And so immediately there starts to be a very vibrant community of modders for this game, which leads to a pool of talent that Digital Cafe can pull from to get a high schooler to do it in afternoons.
Right.
It also just so happens that they did officially license the Doom engine, and they did it, and their game came out 4 months after the release of Quake. So it was essentially, for it, it's like free money.
Right.
And so, of course they're not going to say no to that.
Interesting.
The game is extremely popular in its own right. Here's some of the concept art, and this is really kind of one of the earliest instances I found of, certainly within sort of PC FPS games, of if you just say the gun's not a gun, it's magically non-violent and kid-friendly.
Right. Yeah.
So here, the concept art for the gun looks like kind of a vacuum cleaner or something. They changed the aliens from yellow to green, which I think was just a limitation of the color palette.
Sure.
And they ended up making the weapons look more like remote controls and tricorders from Star Trek and that kind of thing. They did the soundtrack, they did the sound effects at the very end of their dev cycle, and I am certain that they were burnt out and loopy because the sound effects are unhinged, and the reception of the game was extremely good. It's so good that they shipped a Chex Quest 2 in '97. It's not a full-on sequel game, it's an expansion pack. You need the original to run it. And it didn't do as well. It's just not as well fleshed out. But and then General Mills, Ralcorp, General Mills buys out Ralston Purina. The contract with Digital Cafe goes through. I think Digital Cafe goes under. And the fan community creates their own Chex Quest 3.
Okay.
This is
and has this changed engines at this point, or is it
no,
still
it's
in
still
the old
Doom
Doom engine? Okay, all right.
Yeah, everything is still Doom engine at this point. I believe that this is basically just kind of almost like a mixtape of Doom of levels from other Doom mods that just has Chex Quest 3 slapped on the front and like the weapon kit and stuff.
Okay, all right.
But it has been ported to modern engines like GZ Doom or Z-Doom or GZ Doom. And it's also had, for instance, there was one called The Ultimate Chex Quest. This is another fan project, another unofficial thing. I think that this came out in 07 or 08. And then there were multiples of these. There's the new Chex Quest, that's another fan project. But there is an actual Chex Quest 3 that was released in 2009 that Charles Jacoby went back, the original artist, went back and remastered Chex Quest 2 and then built out a Chex Quest 3.
Oh, interesting.
If you remember a few years ago when there was kind of like an advertising bump of like they're re-releasing Chex Quest HD. They had, that was something that Charles Jacoby had just posted on forums about doing that as a personal project, as a way to learn Unreal Engine. And so he had just been tinkering in it for a very long time. And General Mills saw an opportunity for free money and released it.
Right, wow. It was built in Unreal?
Yeah, Chex Quest HD is an Unreal Engine game.
Okay, awesome.
It's up on Steam. It's all right. I prefer the original.
It's okay.
I prefer the original Doom engine.
The original Doom engine has a lot of charm.
It does.
But Unreal does not, unfortunately.
But as so I asked about this in a Discord, and someone just said Chex Quest is dead. I don't really think so.
No.
I forget which one this is. But there are a number of projects that have adopted the kind of very Saturday morning cartoon aesthetic, this kind of really ridiculous conceit of the gun's not a gun, therefore this isn't violent.
Right.
That's kind of become its own thing. This, I believe, this is a game called The Adventures of Square, that is a Z-Doom engine game. It's another Doom total conversion, and the premise is that it's paintball, but everyone is also made of paint. I believe this came out. I think this came out around like 2014. And so we have this kind of bright colors and everything, bright primary colors and kind of very cartoony shapes, with this kind of conceit of these aren't bullets, so therefore. There's also a game called Gloom Busters. This was made by a modder. I believe their name's Skelegant. They made a great mod. They made the King of the Hill Doom mod, where you ride around on your mower drinking beer.
Okay. Yeah.
And this one is about like soccer moms with bad vibes, and you have to change their vibes. And it looks like the map is actually, this is Doom.
Yeah, right. I recognize this layout. Yeah.
Yeah, but all the colors have been swapped. And the guns, you can see that the hands are kind of these cartoon hands now. And the guns you're shooting are like within the world of this game. You're releasing the bad vibes from their bodies.
I see.
Oh yeah, and here's a screenshot from Chex Quest HD.
Oh, is this the
Unreal
game?
Engine version? Yeah,
that's great.
So, yeah, I am. And after this, there's a general shift in advergaming away from shipping product and more towards kind of web and mobile experiences.
Yeah.
And also, games aren't about marketing to kids as much as games are about marketing to 90s kids in certain ways. You get things like the Crystal Pepsi Trail, which is an HTML5 browser game based on the Oregon Trail, but rebranded about the launch of Crystal Pepsi. So that was a thing. You get things like there was the Rick and Morty themed Pokemon clone for iPhone.
Right.
I think this one was like branded content from like Hermes or Balenciaga or something that was that was as a smartphone game, and it was just a ring toss game.
Right.
Yeah,
you're right. It's
just ring toss.
Just horseshoes.
It's just Hermes branded horseshoes.
Okay, fair enough.
And then so when General Mills did this big, this thing around the anniversary of Chex Quest and stuff, they put up kind of a GeoCities styled website with a tiled GIF background, drove a bunch of traffic to their own to their channels and released software that someone else had been making on their own time for free. I'm sure. I mean, I don't know if they. I'm guessing they paid him.
One would hope.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantees in this world. That's fascinating. So I guess I have a few questions. Are you? This is we're okay. I have a few questions. One is, this era is actually very specific, because I feel like I've been talking about this actually to a lot of our freshmen and sophomores. That there was this era where game development was relatively flatter than it is now, and it really was realistic that if you played a game, you probably maybe even had the tool that made that game, right? And that's an ethos that we've lost. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about if you remember that era of games, if you remember that ethos, and what it was like to kind of have a relationship to a game that came with its level editor, came with its...
Sure. Well, I didn't do so much. I wasn't really playing with the level editor myself, but I mean, this is an era where I remember loading software from floppy disk through a DOS prompt. There was a certain level where just interacting with the computer at all what involved a certain level of code literacy. This is also an era when sort of, or this is a slightly earlier thing, but like, type-in games that, you would distribute Commodore 64 software by just printing the source code in a magazine and like having people type it in. And I think that there is a certain, it's funny, I'm reminded of an experience I had a few years ago when my niece was like 12 years old. I got her hooked on Warcraft 2, speaking of 90s PC games. And she was playing in a little emulator environment. And at one point, the game crashed within the emulator, and all of a sudden, she's staring at C:\, at a DOS prompt.
Yeah, exactly.
And she was like, "What is this?" And it was kind of this opportunity to be like, "Oh, this is just a command line interface. This still exists. Like, here's the terminal on your
yeah. This is behind the curtains.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you think that the nostalgia? Obviously, there's nostalgia for Chex Quest in the way that there's nostalgia for this kind of era in general, right? But do you feel like there's also this nostalgia for that level of flatness, like that idea of having video games that seem manageable like the idea that the Chex could just do a full conversion mod of what was one of the most successful video games of that era, and you can recognize that. I mean, like, it's just clearly Doom, right? Anyone who's played Doom recognizes the speed at which you move, recognizes the kind of physics,
right?
Like that. Just, do you think there's any nostalgia for a realm in which games felt simpler and more manageable?
Yeah, and I don't think that's just specific to games. I think that in general, sort of technology is becoming like sort of, as technology becomes more of an abstracted, rich user experience, you lose you lose touch with the fact that this is a machine and I am controlling a machine. Yeah. It's like there's this this really great essay, Rich User Experience and the Desktopization of War by a Russian net artist named Olia Leolina.
Interesting.
Where she talks a lot about this, about how sort of like as you start to go into closed systems where you can't even open up the thing and fix it yourself without violating your terms of service.
Right, yeah.
You just sort of start to, break up the sense that you are in fact interacting with a machine.
Right.
The sort of the immediacy of interacting with a machine, and that sort of creates this weird, this weird in-between zone of like sort of it's meant to feel like magic or it's meant to feel like AI, but it's actually just the same. It's the same thing we've always been using, just with a better, with another veneer on.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me to explain to students that, like, no, these are all just computers. They actually have fairly similar parts. Like, if you break them down, like, they're smaller and larger, and they have different levels of power. But like fundamentally, we're still that IBM desktop that I played Doom on is like kind of still the model for what we're doing even in a smartphone.
And really not that dissimilar to what's inside like an Xbox or a PlayStation 5 either.
Oh no, of course, yeah. So, I mean, Chex Quest is obviously had this very, very interesting history, but I think people might be surprised to hear that there are still Doom mods being made. That Doom is still a canvas on which a lot of people are painting. Could you talk a little bit about that scene and that world?
I think a lot of it has to do with it is a world that it's a world that I'm not a participant in. It's a world I'm more a very interested observer of.
Sure.
And a lot of it takes place on, a lot of it is rooted in forum culture. I think that there is a certain, I think when people talk about sort of missing the old days of the web in specific, I think that that's kind of like, I think one of the reasons that Doom modding persists is because it's an easy avenue to just make your own stuff.
Right,
it's not locked down behind a paywall. It's not part of a walled garden environment of any kind.
Right, yeah.
And increasingly, everything that we work with is. So I think that that's part of what's given it its staying power.
So as a fan watching from outside, do you feel like the aesthetics of Doom mods have changed somewhat since Chex Quest, or are people kind of just recreating the same vibes over? Okay,
there's
what's the current style of Doom mods?
I don't think there's any one current style.
Okay, well, give us a sample.
You have people making things that are kind of like this, that feel very much kind of clip art kind of stuff, or more art games that are running in the Doom engine, where people like to play with the with kind of like the ray casting, but flat sprites.
Right. Yeah.
You get things that are just sort of fun fan projects, like that then take on a life, like Adventures of Square. You get things all the way back to sort of like there's like the Jody.org mod of Quake. You get people, and there's a lineage that goes from there. One of the things I included in the MagFest version was the Grand Theft Auto 5 deer cam, which was just a mod of Grand Theft Auto 5 that just that just ignored any input and followed a deer around.
Interesting. So, there is obviously the larger modding community. Do you feel like that's a healthy scene right now, or do you feel like we could do a lot to get back to the Chex Quest days?
I think that I don't want to comment on the health of a scene I don't really participate in,
yeah.
but I do think that there is a lot to be. I think that there is sort of like that there are a lot of lessons to be taken from modding culture about sort of like not being afraid to take the thing apart and then just put it back together however you see fit.
Nice. Well, before we go, one of the things that Game Center Live is good for is to meet the people who actually work in. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and what you do here? As our production director?
I'm the production technician.
Czar of laptops?
I run the equipment room. So I handle maintaining and supporting our entire fleet of equipment for the Game Center. Things like everything from dongles and mice and controllers to laptops and consoles, and taking apart Guitar Hero controllers and oiling the buttons and things like that.
Yeah.
And just kind of, I also work at Wonderville. I'm the internship coordinator for Wonderville for the NYU Game Center. So Wonderville hires an intern from the Game Center.
Okay.
And on behalf of Wonderville, I'm the point person kind of running that internship.
I see. Cool. And what do you do as a hobby? Like, I see you sometimes out there soldering things together. What you have a relationship to hardware that I feel like is very different from a lot of people's.
I do. I build alt controllers and I build guitars.
Wow.
When I say I build guitars, I don't mean I'm a luthier. I mean I buy things for $25 off Goodwill and take them apart and then put them back together.
Wow.
But yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that and then building learning my way into, wiring up an iPac board and things like that.
Nice. Yeah, I'm hoping maybe someday when I get the time, I'd love to get a little bit more of our curriculum and a little bit more of our students familiar with the actual machines they're working on.
Yeah.
I do think that we have a situation sometimes where people are making art for a thing that they don't really understand how it works and they've never opened one up. And
it's true.
And I think I went to grad school and took physical computing, not brilliant at it, but I've at least programmed a breadboard or something like that. Or wired up a breadboard. And I think there's a demystification that's really really powerful, and I'm glad you're here as part of that flavor to say no, these are just I can open up a Game Boy, we can fix this. This is fine.
I also feel very strongly that it's not as complicated as people think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, where can we find Chex Quest if we wanted to go play any of these games? Do we just Google them? What's the best way to get in touch with these communities and this kind of art?
So so GZ Doom is kind of the most active. The Z Doom and GZ Doom forums are where I go for a lot of stuff. There's also ModDB. Those are both good sites for looking up mods for all kinds of games, not just Doom. ModDB covers mods for all kinds of stuff. As far as Chex Quest goes, I believe that when you download I believe that when you just download sort of the core the core WAD files for in common freeware distros of Doom, I think Chex Quest is
just in there.
There.
It's
kind of enshrined.
It's enshrined. Okay, it's deeply written into the history of Doom.
It is.
Well, great, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. This is a great way, I feel like, to start out.
Thanks for giving me a platform.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, next up, I believe we have Naomi and Aaron, who are going to talk probably mostly about Unity. Almost nothing. We're talking about engines. Today is Engine Day on Game Center Live.
It's true.
We're talking about the glorious Halcyon past, and next we're going to talk...
Open freeware engines, and now...
Next up, we're going to talk about our terrifying lockdown walled garden futures. Maybe not. Maybe it's Godot the way out. Who knows? We'll find out next. But yeah, thank you. Thank you, Karl.
All right, thank you.
All right, I believe we are all set up and ready to go for the discourse. Take it away, Naomi and Aaron.
Welcome back to the Discourse. It's been a little while since we sat up here going over the week's news in games and game-adjacent cultures and giving our hot takes to you out there. Hello, audience. It's nice to see you again. With me today is Aaron Freedman, longtime member of the Game Center community. You've taught classes for us.
Yes.
You've taken classes here, and now you're. Would you say you're heading up indie studio? Is that
Well, I would
one
like
of the
to,
people?
not currently, but if anyone's got some money, let me know. But yeah, I'm an independent game designer. I was previously at Fulbright,
Right.
Working on Open Roads with Annapurna, which should hopefully be out soon, but no news on that yet. But yeah.
And so was that Open Roads, is that a Unity project?
It is a Unity game.
Okay, and that sort of brings us to our first big news. If you've been paying attention at all to the news in games, you have heard about Unity's big news of the last week. I think it dropped about a week ago now. They made a change in their pricing structure, which immediately blew up the internet and everybody using Unity because I don't know, a whole bunch of reasons. What do you think were the worst things about this announcement?
I think the thing that people were most mad about, including myself first, is just that it kind of felt very out of touch with the user base and especially the smaller sort of companies and people that use it. I think maybe there's a little bit of acceptance that if you are making hundreds of millions of dollars on a video game, then maybe you have to pay the engine. But I think for everyone else, and the fact that they were kind of reversing the kind of sentiments that they had expressed earlier.
Right, it was sort of dropped out of nowhere. They had previously said, okay, we're not going to change things on you. And then they had sort of sneakily taken that language out sometime like 6 months ago. And so in the old days, it was basically you paid, you either had the free license or you paid a subscription fee if you were like over a certain amount of revenue. And that was it, right? And then the new one basically said, all right, once you have a certain number of users, then, and is it users and money or users or money?
So the plan that they are proposing, which is now sort of
it's now up in the air,
who knows what the real plan is anymore, but it was basically once you reached a certain lifetime downloads and then also a 12-month revenue that was rolling for every 12 months,
right,
then you would qualify for the install.
Right. So then once you hit this threshold, it's like, all right, for every install, and this was the thing that if people had huge questions, you'd have to pay like 15 cents or something like that.
Yeah, anywhere from 20 to 1 cent.
20 cents to $1 or something.
20 cents if you're on the free plan, and
Right.
then down to 1 cent.
Oh, down to
install.
1 cent if it's like if you're on the big plan.
Although
Right.
how exactly that actually would work.
But still, it could add up to huge things.
extremely unclear.
And then people were like, all right, but what if somebody installs my game a whole bunch of times? What if they install on different devices? What if we're part of a free bundle that we're not making any money on? And then at first, Unity like responses were sort of trying to whack-a-mole with these questions, and we're like coming up with all sorts of things like we're going to like track if you're giving it away to charity. Yeah. But that all seems to have collapsed by now, right? It's now kind of...
who knows? I mean, we don't have any actual official statement from Unity. We just have some sort of secondhand reporting.
Right. They've said, they've told people inside the company, okay, we're going to change it.
Yes.
We're going to put caps on these fees so you're not suddenly liable for more money than you made, which seemingly would have been possible for like some types of games in the past. But the reaction to this was pretty swift and overwhelming. Let's bring up that second link. Yeah, so the first of the link that we had up there, that was it's a pretty good rundown of like everything that went wrong and all the potential problems if you want the overview. And then I think it's the second or third link, there were just a whole bunch of people saying, I think this is the one, like saying like, all right, could we potentially sue Unity for doing this? Are there legal problems? It's been a big turmoil. But at this point, I guess everyone's now in wait and see mode, except I think the one persistent thing, and this is what I'd love your opinion on. I've seen a lot of people saying, look, you can't come back from this because it's clearly like even Unity feels like, oh, we didn't communicate this very well. But the trust is breached, right? Yeah. And so everybody who's making a game with Unity, you're kind of in business with them, except they usually just like don't even care about who you are. But you're like affected. Like when you guys at Fulbright were working on a Unity project, what Unity decides to do with it is like affects the future of your team or other teams. Like given that you have a bunch of experience in Unity, both from the Game Center and afterwards. So do you think, do people feel differently now about like, I don't even want to be involved with these people if they're going to pull this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think right now, especially given the fact that it's still very uncertain what's actually going to happen in the future, and that it seems like they're willing to kind of treat their previous statements very lightly, and the fact that they state to the games community that they're going to run their business in a certain way, and then a couple years later they're very willing to completely upend that, I think adds additional uncertainty onto what is already a very uncertain business.
Right.
And especially for a company that is, if you're running a budget for a game, even if you're having to pay an extra $20,000 a year, $30,000, or more that you weren't expecting to,
right?
That's money that
it could just eat the whole profit margin of a small game, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so it's not even so. I think one of the first things we did here was we sort of looked at the numbers and we were like, is this going to affect like a student project? Somebody makes a thesis or a capstone here and rolls it out, and we were like, okay, at the levels they're talking about, probably it's not going to be a big deal for like almost any project, but there's still this bigger philosophical question now, and like we're getting a lot of inquiries. People are asking me. I think some of our faculty have given statements to the press too. Like, is it a good idea to sort of form a relationship with Unity if you just don't know like what's going to happen to the company? Like, have you been having thoughts in the last week about like what is the future of Unity as a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think for, at least for myself, it's complicated. I think it's in a situation where Unity, because of the way that they have operated, have become very dominant in the industry. So it's, if I'm thinking about working at a studio or making a game or pitching something to a publisher, it's highly likely that, until Tuesday, that would, like, I think almost guaranteed that it would have been a Unity.
It just sort of been like a non-conversation. Be like, we're almost certainly going to use Unity.
So part of that is, maybe that's a red flag. Like maybe we're a bit too dependent on the engine itself already. But at the same time, what are your options?
Good question.
Right,
and so
options?
Even right now, as we speak, like on the other side of that wall over there, one of our current MFAs is giving a workshop on Godot. Right, because it's like it's suddenly become the time, and like everyone started asking about it. And then of course around here we also have a couple classes that are taught in Unreal, which is the sort of major commercial competitor to Unity. But I have tooled around in all of these engines and worked on projects with people who are doing much more tooling around in those engines than me. only a little bit with Godot, honestly, because it's the newest of the three. But my impression is, all right, none of these, like neither of the other two are exactly Unity. They have their own strengths, but they're not like an easy replacement, right?
Yeah. And I think that is also, one thing that, one of the reasons why Unity is so popular is also because it provided something that other engines didn't provide. And, of course, we started using it for those reasons. And like you said, Godot and Unreal are not exact replacements for Unity, so it is a very difficult position to be in right now.
And I don't want to. So now I feel like, oh, you know what? Yeah, we don't have chat up on the screen right now. Maybe we should, so I can see if anybody's being like, no, Godot rules forever. I feel like there's like suddenly like a huge amount of energy around Godot.
I think that's still good. Like,
it is good. I think it's definitely like we were already thinking about Godot a year ago, right? Because of what you were mentioning, like, do we really want to be totally beholden to Unity? So many people are Unity shops, and everyone's a little bit like, okay, yeah, this works, but I wish we weren't like a monoculture, right? I wish we weren't just relying on this one tool, because Unity is also good at some things and not good at other things, even if it's evolved to be a little bit more of an unwieldy Swiss Army knife of a software engine. But I guess my impression is that, and tell me what you think of this. So Godot is, one, it's open source, which is fantastic. There's now like a Cambrian explosion of people suddenly making things for Godot. It's MIT licensed, which means like anyone could fork it and just make their own version of Godot, which is both exciting and sort of terrifying to be like, okay, well, that's one thing if you're like an experienced developer. You're like, all right, I've got all these options. It's another thing if you're like trying to teach a class and tell a bunch of people who've never used a game engine before, what should you use? Like, what recommendation can I give you? And it's not super strong in 3D yet, right? Yeah.
I mean, I think I would say that, if you're in a position where, especially if you're learning how to make a video game for the first time, or, you haven't really shipped a major project yet, I think, at the first level, it maybe doesn't matter that much what engine you're using.
Sure.
And you probably don't need to worry about the financial part of it.
Right.
Because I think it is true that, what Unity is saying is that, most of the people who ever make a video game are never going to make money.
That's one way.
But let's not get.
But also, you don't want to just operate on that assumption. Right?
Exactly, and that's part of the problem with Unity's statement, right? That they're basically saying that you all suck at making video games. But on the other hand, having played around with Godot myself a little bit, it does remind me very much of what it was like to use Unity, 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
When it wasn't that popular, there wasn't a lot of documentation about it. The tutorials are very slim. You don't have a lot of examples of what people are actually doing with it. So it does feel very Wild Wet. It's very DIY.
So I can see why people are super excited about it, for sure. And but I think it's probably very different depending on how much experience you have. Having you've gone through the sort of early days of Unity.
And I get a lean on all of the experience I have from having used game engines for quite a long time already.
Right, exactly. So I don't know, we're gonna be continuously thinking about this here, especially because we also have a lot of students who are like, I want to get a job at a game studio, and there's not many game studios that are like, oh, we're looking for experienced Godot developers. At least not yet. But and so we do always have students who are like, oh, can you please let me put Unreal on my resume? Teach me how to make Unreal. I don't know. I just sort of feel like we're pushed or pulled in multiple directions. I'm guessing that most people who are currently making a project in Unity are not suddenly switching gears unless they're very excited. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. I did see actually Brian Bucklew of Cades of Cud team. They already had someone on their team who was sort of good at Godot.
Yeah.
But they just completely ported all the code over already to Godot.
Yeah, and it really depends on, what that particular company or team's workflow is and how they've made the game. It's hard to kind of make any blanket statement about how. I mean, regardless, it's going to cost them time and money. Which on the one hand, if it's proof to me that it's not simply an argument about the financial side of the whole Unity cost per install thing. It's much more of a moral argument for especially these indie studios. Yeah,
no, I buy what you're saying. I think there is a huge moral dimension to it. And that makes it more difficult for us, I think.
Yeah.
Because we're sort of trying to be like, okay, what should we be doing for the practical interest of students who are like, I'm going to an expensive school. I want to get a job, and you tell me what I need to do that. And then also, we don't want to like lock everyone into like down the golden path of unity that you never have to leave either. So I don't know, evolving situation. My prediction as the chair of the department is, if somebody in this department, if people get really excited about Godot and become like Godot wizards and make, like somebody's saying on chat right now, decide to fork Godot into our own branch, that would probably make it more likely that we'll use it. But I think we really just have to see where the enthusiasm is, like what students want to do. We don't, of course, forbid anybody from using whatever engine they want. But it's probably more about like, what do we teach people who have no idea what a game engine is? It's like the biggest question.
Yeah, I think my opinion on those, that would be a kind of twofold, where for, I think, especially like students and people currently at the Game Center, just make a game. Like, just it doesn't matter if it's Game Maker, it doesn't matter if it's Unreal, like just make a game.
Good point.
And then the other thing that I think is kind of significant that we haven't really touched on is also the ecosystem that the whole Unity kind of, I guess, like the fact that it is such a large group of developers created this ecosystem of assets and tools and resources and materials that made making Unity games a lot easier.
Right.
So at the same time,
like all of yarn and fungus and like for visuals, all sorts of things, right? That it is not there in the same way. I saw a team somewhere online saying that they were moving their visual novel to Unreal, and I was like, oh no, that's just a terrible idea. No.
It's going to be RTX.
It's going to be
ray traced,
a ray traced visual novel. It's all 3D, and then there's some 2D cardboard cutouts popping up to say some visual novel dialogue. I think it's going to be a chaotic time maybe, and I don't know. I'm not even sure. Like, is Unity going to be around in 5 years? Like you said,
I will say that it is still going to exist.
Okay, so Aaron's saying it's still going to exist. I'm worried that that there's something going on with Unity shareholders. Like, I'm not going to make any statements or anything, but one of the reasons I think Unity is backpedaling so hard is because they have already been sort of punished by stock analysts for this, right? They're saying like, hey, we noticed that the heads of the company, like, the higher ups have sold off a bunch of stock right before this happened, and the Wall Street people's analysis of this is, you guys knew this was going to be unpopular, which I don't know if it's true, but the Wall Street was like, this is really bad news, because they look at a move like that and they're like, are you trying to like drive this company into the ground and like load it up with debt? So who knows? I mean, those are also like, nobody knows, like you can't really make game development decisions on the basis of that. Yeah. But it scares a lot of people, I think. And speaking of that, let's go to the, I'm gonna skip forward one, Logan, and go to the terrible article about Bain Capital. It's on Bain.com. It's somewhere in there. Yeah, it's the fourth section. Yeah, so speaking of rapaciously sort of like extracting money from entertainment industries or any kind of industry, this article popped up on Bain.com today. If you don't know Bain, it's a company that sounds as evil as it actually is. It sounds like a Batman villain, but they're kind of known for having spun off Mitt Romney's company, that sort of invented what's called vulture capitalism, right? Just kind of like draining the profit out of something and leaving like a dry husk behind, which is what people are afraid might happen to Unity. This is their consulting arm that sort of tell other giant companies what to do, and they published a whole article on like, how is the game industry going to use generative AI? And really, I don't know if you got a chance to look at this.
I didn't get a chance to look at that particular one.
Yeah, so this is the one. So they were mostly interviewing game industry CEOs. These CEOs were kind of cautious about it compared to like, I don't know, some sort of wild-eyed, tech industry people out there. They're like, yeah, we don't want to use it for anything creative. We want to automate production tasks. It's going to make our creative teams' lives easier, but we're definitely going to use it. That's sort of the outlook. That doesn't seem super surprising to me, but does give me a little bit, like, I don't know. I guess I would expect that to be what game industry CEOs would say about this.
Yeah, I think I just listened to some podcast with the CEO of one of those AI companies, and that is exactly the line that they gave. It's like, it's here to kind of like, basically all the producers, all of the product manager, like they're like, let's get rid of them first, basically.
Get rid of the producers and project managers.
Like, because we can automate it, we can automate Agile or something.
Okay. This all sort of like raises so many questions, so many problems. And, I feel like the fantasy for some people here is like, the most boring part of my job, like, I don't know, like texture processing of some sort is just going to be like, I'm just going to type in a prompt and then AI is going to do it for me. And I don't know, the knock-on effects of that are just so unpredictable. Like, what does it mean? Like, obviously the CEOs are interested in this because they're like, and, we can ship much faster. Is that going to lead to less crunch or more crunch? It's really kind of hard to say. Yeah.
Same but different.
Yeah, same but different. That's a good way of looking at it, but with like new shiny thing that's controversial. And now you have to learn how to like, I don't know, write prompts in a way that doesn't lead to like massive bugs and errors, which seems to be what everybody using GitHub Copilot is experiencing.
I think there'll always be pressure to ship your game faster. There'll always be pressure to do it on a cheaper budget with less people.
Right, so this is just the sort of new face of the same thing, has a robot painted on the outside of it instead. Let's go to another generative AI story. Go to the Polygon story about this Kickstarter. So you did see this one, right? This is a board game industry. We're jumping from video games to board games. And so this is a case where Kickstarter announced their policy on, I don't even like saying generative AI because AI is itself a sort of marketing term. I'm just going to be like generative machine learning, machine generated art. And if you don't know Terraforming Mars, it's a pretty popular, like high-ranked on Board Game Geek franchise that's rolled out a lot of expansions, and this is their latest one on Kickstarter. It's raised $1.5 million already, and then somebody noticed that like, they filled out Kickstarter's new mandatory disclosure of use of AI, and they basically said, the designers of this game, because it's the publishers who are doing the Kickstarter and who are interviewed in this piece we put up. The company making this game, they used a lot of generated art and not crediting anybody. Oops, did we lose? 1 second. Okay, technical difficulties, but I'll keep talking about it regardless. We're using generative AI. We're not bothering to try and deal with any of the crediting or licensing or sort of ethical use problems. We don't care. And Kickstarter apparently also didn't care. Because Kickstarter made a big noise in August. They were like, if you are using one of these unethically sourced generative engines like Midjourney or something, we're probably not going to let you on our platform. Except I guess this was the exception to the probably, because like, probably not unless you make millions of dollars. And then we're just going to look the other way.
I think this is also very representative of kind of the trend with these content generation AI and like policies regarding it, where everyone wants to say something about it, but no one's actually willing to actually do anything.
To like really lower the hammer. Except for Steam. Well, and even Steam has its weird exceptions, right? Like there was the latest game from the folks who made Myst and Riven, Cyan. They use AI stuff in their latest game, and Steam did not ban them. But apparently Steam does have this policy that's like, we don't know what the legal provenance is of any of this stuff unless you can certify that all the rights are clear. You're like booted off the platform. But again, I don't know. Is it just if you make enough money, then these rules don't apply to you?
Well, you can maybe say that about a lot of things in life,
a lot of things, right?
I think that is also... Well, I mean, it's a good question. I don't know what the answer to that is, because at a certain point, if we're talking about Steam and other platforms, like Kickstarter, where, if a game does very well on that platform, they stand to gain.
That's right. So there's a conflict of interest. Yes. And that's why they don't say like 100% you'll never be. They're going to like judge, right? And so maybe it's impossible for them not to be like, this seems okay. Because the argument made by the publishers here is, look, this is the developer Fricks Games, who have their own share of controversies. Their lead designer had to apologize for like posting a bunch of transphobic stuff on Facebook last year. They're like, they're using it, and it's a bunch of artists who worked on the previous games. It's the same team, and those artists now are using generative AI tools. And so the publisher's kind of passing the buck. And then if you think about it, if you look at Terraforming Mars, it's not a game that has ever been known for art, right? I think somebody just, Salty Horse just mentioned this in chat, right? This is like a clip art and stock photography photo bashed together. I'm gonna put a picture of an astronaut onto a picture of Mars, right? And then I'm gonna put that on the card.
So what you're saying is we understand why they maybe needed the help.
Yeah, well, it's very clear. This is where we're seeing like all sorts of machine-generated content. It comes in first at the like clickbait articles that they don't care if anyone reads it in the first place, right? It could just be like machine garbage. You have big newspapers using it for like obituaries and sports scores and things that like they think like, okay, does anyone actually need to read or write this? It's just regurgitated stuff. And then this is clearly the board game equivalent, right? It's the artwork on a card for a game that has never been sold on the merits of artwork, right? Now, if you're making millions of dollars, maybe you should hire an artist. I don't know. What?
I mean, it really makes me wonder kind of like with this kind of overall trend and kind of the sentiment in the interview is especially that, both Kickstarter and then also, the owners of the companies are kind of pushing the responsibility of kind of making a decision about AI onto like the consumers and then also their peers in the industry. They're kind of taking a hands-off approach and then saying, hey, if the people who are buying these games don't like it, they can just not buy our game, which really makes me wonder, like, I mean, if my mom saw this board game and it's like, she'd have no idea.
No, of course not. Like a lot of artists can tell if it's sort of like, I don't know, Weird Fingers or like 85 Teeth or whatever. But a lot of people are not going to notice. That's not why anyone is buying these games in the first place. So they're taking a very obvious gamble. They're like, we don't think anyone's going to care about this. And I think they're probably right. Like they're not going to lose very many Kickstarter backers from this. So it really is a tone-setting thing, I think, for the board game industry. And we'll just sort of see where people fall. I mean, some people keep predicting like, oh, we're gonna have like artisanal board games where it's like you're on Kickstarter, you're like, oh, if we get to this stretch goal, we'll replace these machines with actual human beings or something like that. Which is, I don't know. It seems like a sort of boring, bad version of the future.
I feel like there are some kind of important points though that were mentioned in the interview where I think the use of generative AI. Like, this is a kind of very obvious example of it, but I think it has, it's never so cut and dry.
Yeah.
And it's been slowly increasing in usage. Like, I think even years ago, there were instances that I know of people using it for professional work.
Yeah, I mean,
it wasn't a top.
Nobody really thought it was controversial until ChatGPT and Midjourney came out, right? And even now, even in this, the article where this Polygon journalist is like really using hard-hitting questions, there are people saying like, oh, well, there are okay uses of AI. You can use them to like, I don't know, like upscale your images or something that's not creative, doesn't replace labor. But like what exactly constitutes replacing labor? Or even like maybe replacing your own labor, which is a different story that maybe
like we're not really talking about code generation and kind of that, like using it for assistance in those ways as well. So.
Right. All right, we are almost out of time. So I think we should jump right to Turkey. Thanks to Alexander King, we found, so there's a bunch of other articles. Saudi Arabia is now trying to build a video game industry. Pokemon changed Warhammer Forever. Pro soccer players are playing on their own in a little field in England where they don't have to do it for work. But then this last thing is what I wanted to jump to. Thanks to Alexander King for suggesting this. This is a super weird story. There is apparently a big resort hotel in Turkey that is called the Azura Deluxe Spa and Resort. And Azura, for those who are not huge Bethesda fans, is one of the Daedric Prince sort of like evil gods of the world of Tamriel, where Skyrim and a whole bunch of other games, Elder Scrolls games, are set. And that's her. Like, there's statues of this goddess all around, and it's named after her. What is going on? Your thoughts?
Maybe the developers are just very big Bethesda fans.
But not just Bethesda fans, right? They're like, we love like this really, goddess.
Yes, just like slightly obscure, like lore. Maybe they read a lot of the books in in Oblivion.
Yeah, I cannot tell. Like this, when I saw this, I'm like, this definitely could be from a 3D model.
Yes. Yeah. So here's the yeah. Is it a deep fake? Like, is this fake news? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. Well, I think it's too weird just to be a deepfake. Like,
Yeah.
Why? Like, it's so unbelievable at the beginning, and it's not quite sensational enough. It's just weird. And then I think the most entertaining thing is trying to imagine how this is going to come about, right?
Yeah.
It's like, some architect is like, I'm obsessed with this minor character.
Yes.
She is my ideal figure, and I just basically want to make a temple to her in the real world.
I mean, maybe they did some generative AI, concept art, and then
right, and they showed it to the to the people who are funding this, and like, I don't know, like, what do you tell the funders for this hotel? Like, oh, this is an ancient god and goddess,
Yes.
definitely not copyrighted by a video game company in Maryland.
No.
But I also want to know, like, does Bethesda know about this? Where's the comment from Bethesda?
I would hope that if they do get to know about this, that they actually just let it. They're like, please have some more.
Oh my god,
actually.
if I were one of the writers who worked on any of those lore books or who came up with this character, I'd be like, oh, my dream has come true. Somebody's lost it and made a hotel based on my character. I'm flying there
They
right
need to
now.
Whoever made the statues and have it in their canvas.
Yeah, no, I just feel like right there. Take a picture of me next to my character that I came up with for some lore.
That's great.
The dream come true. All right, I think we have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to our resident master of Game Center Live, Logan Clare, for holding it down as always. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. That has been Game Center Live for today, Tuesday, September 19th, 2023. Thanks again to the hosts who helped us out with the show today. That would be Charles Pratt, who talked to Karl Hohn about Chex Quest. And then, of course, you just saw Naomi Clark and Aaron Freedman on the Discourse. Game Center Live will be continuing this semester. Our next episode will be in 2 weeks, same time. So it'll be Tuesday, October 3rd at 11 a.m. EST. And yeah, for the person asking in chat, captioning is provided by AI Media, and they'll be providing captions for this season of Game Center Live. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you all next time.